Good morning and welcome to our daily devotional from Pilgrim Congregational Church. I'm Patrick Horn. Very glad to have you with us on this Monday morning, February the 5th, 2024. It would be appropriate in Southern California to have a devotional on Noah and the flood, but that is not our passage this morning. Our passage this morning comes from 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And this is the story of Elijah and Elisha. And this is, in fact, the story of Elijah being taken up into the heavens by chariots of fire. And the time period here is sometime in the mid 9th century BC. So this would have been after the time of David, around the time of the king Ahaziah, I think is his name, Ahaziah. But the focus of the scripture is really on this story, the relationship between Elijah and Elisha, and the succession of one major prophet to another, from Elijah to Elisha. So 2 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Now, when the Lord was about to take Elijah up to heaven by a whirlwind, Elijah and Elisha were on their way from Gilgal. Elijah said to Elisha, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me as far as Bethel." But Elisha said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of prophets who were in Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he said, "Yes, I know. Keep silent." Elijah said to him, "Elisha, stay here, for the Lord has sent me to Jericho." But he said, "As the Lord lives and you yourself live, I will not leave you." So they came to Jericho. The company of prophets who were at Jericho drew near to Elisha and said to him, "Do you know that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" And he answered, "Yes, I know. Be silent." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, for the Lord has sent me to the Jordan." But he said, "As the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." So the two of them went on. 50 men of the company of prophets also went and stood at some distance from them, as they both were standing by the Jordan. Then Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water. The water was parted to the one side and to the other until the two of them crossed on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me what I may do for you before I am taken from you." Elisha said, "Please let me inherit a double share of your spirit." He responded, "You have asked a hard thing. Yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it will be granted you. If not, it will not." As they continued walking and talking, a chariot of fire and horses of fire separated the two of them, and Elijah ascended in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha kept watching and crying out, "Father, Father, the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." But when he could no longer see him, he grasped his own clothes and tore them in two pieces. So this is the story of the succession of one great prophet to another, from Elijah to Elisha, two of the most famous prophets in the history of Israel. And you may notice that they travel in the story with these literary characteristics, the repetition of the pattern where Elijah says stay and Elisha says no. As you live and as the Lord lives, I will stay with you. And so they go from Bethel to Jericho, and then on to Jordan, and then they come to the place where Moses died, near the banks of the Jordan, and a very significant place. And then there's this very miraculous story of the waters being parted and they're walking on the bed of the Jordan River. And as they're walking, separated, they become separated by chariots of fire and horses of fire, and Elijah is taken up into the heavens by a whirlwind. So clearly, there's a lot of symbolism here. A lot of this, of course, has to do with the authority and the power that Elijah is said to have as having been called by God. So one of the rarest stories of all, of course, is for someone to be taken into heaven while they're still living. And so this is a very distinctive story for concerning the life and times of Elijah. So lots to reflect on this week concerning Elijah and Elisha and prophecy, and look forward to sharing more with you. Let's close with this word of prayer from W.E. Orchard. O God, who so fills all things that they only thinly veil thy presence, we adore thee in the beauty of the world, in the goodness of human hearts, and in thy thought within the mind. We praise thee for the channels through which thy grace can come to us, sickness and health, joy and pain, freedom and necessity, sunshine and rain, life and death. We thank thee for all the gentle and healing ministries of life, the gladness of the morning, the freedom of the wind, the music of the rain, the joy of the sunshine, and the deep calm of the night, for trees and flowers and clouds and skies, for the tender ministries of human love, the unselfishness of parents, the love that binds a man and a woman, the confidence of little children, for the patience of teachers and the encouragement of friends. We bless thee for the stirring ministry of the past, for the story of noble deeds, the memory of holy men and women, the printed book, the painter's art, the poet's craft, most of all for the ministry of the Son of Man, who taught us the eternal beauty of earthly things, who by his life set us free from fear, and by his death won us from our sins to thee. For his cradle, his cross, and his crown. May his spirit live within us, conquer all the selfishness within, and take away the sin of the world. In the Spirit of Christ we pray. Amen. Thank you for being with me this morning from Pilgrim Congregational Church. I'm Patrick Horn, and I hope that you have a very good day. Goodbye. Good morning, friends on Zoom. Welcome.
Hello. Hello. How
Hello,
are you?
Steve. I'm doing well. How are you this morning?
Oh, pretty well. No sleep, but I'm well.
Very good. Glad to have you join us. Yes, sleep seems to be a premium these days.
Yeah, it
Uh,
was lovely to have the rain while I was awake, though.
yeah, that's true. Very glad to have Gracia Faye and Robert here with me this morning, and this incredible story of Elijah and Elisha, two of the most well-known prophets in the Old Testament. Jesus makes reference to them in his first sermon, actually, or one of his first, in when he's preaching in Nazareth, I think, and um, and of course there's reference again to Elijah, because of this very story of his being taken up into the heavens before he had even died. So I wonder if there are any comments or questions or thoughts or suggestions about this passage. Yes, Robert.
Well, I was interested in the reference to company of prophets, many of 50 in one place, apparently, which first suggests that prophecy, or at least the idea of prophecy, was apparently a fairly current concept in Israel at that time, the time of the early kings and so on, starting with Samuel. And that I don't know how long this existence of a large body of prophets lasted, but it was certainly apparently significant at this time, and those that emerged out of it with wide recognition, like Elijah and Elisha, were very special, but they were apparently only one of many.
Yeah, no, that is a very interesting part of the story and the references here. The term that's used there in the Hebrew of company could also be familial. That is, it could be sons
Oh, really?
Of the prophet. Yeah. The implication, however, seems to be that the context and the way the words are used implies that if they are family members or children of the prophet, they also participate and engage in the family business, as it were, that they were prophets themselves. So it's
Yeah.
possible that it's the prophet's
both.
family. You could also imagine, of course, that with the importance of the role of the prophet by this time, this would have, as I said, there were several kings in now into we're 150, 200 years into the kings now in the history of Israel. And the role of the prophet has become pretty well established. You could imagine that the family of the prophet might be somehow engaged in the family business. That is, the whole family might have been supporters of the prophet, as it were, and a part of, almost in a there are certain features of the life of the prophet that are similar to like a court family, because the prophet seems to always get an audience with the king when he wants one, and so there is kind of a sense of royalty here, and but of course in a way that's quite different from the family of the king. But in any event, it was an established role. People would have had very high regard for Elijah even in his own lifetime, right? And so I imagine that this company is some kind of company of attendees and supporters, whether family or not. It certainly seems to heavily imply that. But very, very interesting. It does reflect on our earlier passage from Deuteronomy concerning the law about the role of prophecy, and in that passage in Deuteronomy, sort of emphasizing that prophecy was an important part of the nation of Israel. Yeah.
What if the prophets were like successors of the judges before the kings?
The successors of the
judges.
Oh, the judges. Well, there's some speculation about that. Robert asked about the judges. There was a period of judges that preceded the period of kings, and the period of judges were judges who were appointed to settle disagreements within and between tribes and families, and played a kind of certainly played a sort of ruling type of role, certainly. But the prophets seem not to quite fit into that category either. When you look at the way prophecy is talked about in the Old Testament, there is, of course, a lot of crossover, like different responsibilities crossing over between kings and judges and prophets
Right.
and priests. The prophet seems to be the most malleable of those. That is, the prophet seems to be the one who could, in some respects, get away with doing any number of these roles in a way that a king and a judge and a priest could not quite pull off.
Right.
And so, and I think this is part of why you have sort of retroactively, you have Moses frequently called a prophet, because he has that kind of flexibility where you not only, of course, the key factor being that he is the voice of the Lord, you know,
Yes.
to the people, but he also operates kind of across lines in terms of the different roles, and so Moses is understandably more aligned with the role of the prophet than any of the other three roles, right? Priest or judge or king. So there is, as I said in that sermon and the discussions that we had a couple of weeks ago, there is something very important and distinctive about the role of the prophet in Judaism and the history of Judaism, and the influence of that role on Christianity. And maybe, I mean, I don't know how many of you know this, but my wife Faye is publishing a book on the influence of the Old Testament prophet model on 19th century American literature, particularly Nathaniel Hawthorne, is who she primarily focuses on. But within American literature, more broadly, the concept of the prophet, kind of the Old Testament prophet, and sort of the picture of John the Baptist and the things that associated with that role, that type features large in American literature. And I would say, too, in American history and thought, and the concept of the church and the preacher. And there's this strong idea that God might call anyone from any background, to preach and to speak. And it's like the cook in Chef Gusteau in Ratatouille. He titled his famous cookbook "Anyone Can Cook."
Yeah.
And by the end of the movie, what he means by that is that a great cook can come from anywhere. And there is that concept is very heavily played with the prophet in American history and literature, that this voice could come from anywhere and from anyone, and that God works in this way. And especially, I think, the idea of a message from God that doesn't come from a place that you might expect it. It doesn't come from, the government leader or ruler or the wealthiest person in town or things of that sort. It could come from anyone. So pretty important concept in our own sort of understanding of who we are as Americans.
Right.
Yeah.
Quick yes or no question.
Yes.
And then I've got several good ones, or a couple good ones. Well, shoot. can't remember it now. So I'll skip it and do the ones I wrote down. Sorry about that. So the Elisha wanted a double portion of Elijah's mantle. So first of all, what is mantle? I know it means the prophet's mantle, but can you go into that a little bit more? And then the word spirit here, I was wondering if the Hebrews made a distinction on the tripartite soul, or the bitart, whatever, two parts of the soul, or three parts of the soul, or whatever it is. I wonder if the Hebrews made those sorts of distinctions, or if that's really Greek. And then a funny question. Are we next week going to do 13 through 25? I hope. The rest of the chapter.
The rest of chapter 2.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Well.
Let me see. I
I'm
think
gonna have to do the research myself. Darn it.
Story today.
Yeah, I know. No, I don't think so. We're going to, as I've been saying, the lectionary has us skipping around. I suppose it doesn't want to get. They don't want us to get too comfortable in one story.
It's working.
Yeah, it's working. So I'll take them in reverse order. No, we're not doing the latter half of 2 Kings 2. Then your second question, now
soul and spirit.
Yeah. The mantle, right?
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
So if you notice the New Revised Standard Version that I read, he asked for a double share of your spirit, is how it's translated.
Oh, right. I was quoting King James, wasn't I?
Maybe. I'm not sure, because now it does say in verse 8, Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water.
That's what it was.
The water was parted to the one side and to the other until the two of them crossed on dry ground. Let me see. I would suspect that what's translated as spirit there in verse 9 is not mantle, but is I bet it's nephesh.
Soul.
Which does deal with your second question. I'm sorry, which had to do with the Hebrew understanding of the nature of soul or spirit or those kinds of things. Yes,
right.
The tripartite idea is very Greek, and you don't really get that very strongly at all in Hebrew. What you get in Hebrew is this word nephesh or ruach. So ruach is breath or wind, and often translated as spirit. And then nephesh is even more what am I trying to say? Ethereal. But nephesh is the one that is usually translated as soul. It is associated with thinking and feeling. That is the human sentience, like a sentient being. And as we've talked about before, that sort of feature of human life is expressed in the use of the word heart, the human heart is associated with this thinking and feeling and this idea of being sentient.
Yes.
Now, ruach is more associated with breath and more associated with life. So if there is a distinction here, and I think there is, it would be the distinction between the with ruach, a very rich notion of life, that is all of the preciousness of life expressed in this idea of the breath, that the whole of one's life might be expressed in with that one term. And so most English translators translate it as spirit, but I would emphasize that it's sort of like it's the spirit of life. And then nephesh would be, that's often translated as soul, would be more associated with the thinking, feeling, sentient being that is often expressed both in, well, this may be one of those places that the New Testament is influenced by the Hebrew rather than the Greek. That is the use of the word heart.
Yes.
We used to have these arguments with Dennis MacDonald at Claremont School of Theology, who an extraordinary scholar. He was famous for pointing out how many correlations there are in the New Testament between the Gospels and Homer, Homer's Greek stories. And it is striking. There are quite a number. Most of it probably has to do with the fact that anyone trained in reading and writing Greek would have been trained through the use of the stories of Homer. So Homer's stories had a broad effect on the way that people thought and wrote during the first couple of centuries. And however, it's important to remember that, well, not only was the early church mostly Jewish, but it's also important to remember that the Hebrew Bible had been translated into Greek for at least a couple of hundred years and was being used by the writers of the New Testament. And so you already have an intermingling of Greek and Hebrew at a pretty sophisticated level, such that we should not only look for and find Greek influences on Hebrew, but also Hebrew influences on Greek, and especially perhaps in this notion of the heart, because in the New Testament, the heart often refers also to the thinking part of the human being, and that might actually be much more strongly a Hebrew concept than a Greek concept.
I have a book called an Orthodox book called "The Hidden Man of the Heart." So I see your point, and I really understand it. I do want to follow up with a question, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
and I don't have time to look it up, or we don't have time for me to look it up. But I could insist almost that Paul makes reference to body, soul, and spirit. But I could be all wet on that. Does that sound familiar? May your body, soul, and spirit be blessed in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, but Robert and I both think that Paul does do that.
I think it's toward the end of 1 Corinthians.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
Into 1 Corinthians. Does that sound familiar?
Oh, sure. Anywhere in the New Testament, sure.
Yeah, I think so. And of course, I mean, Paul is I mean, Paul may be the most extraordinary historical character in the history of the West. I mean, he was, I mean, yeah, he's responsible for so much. And again, though, I would argue with Dennis MacDonald that, that Paul was Jewish and Jewish trained. Yes, he was trained probably uh, mostly through the Greek language,
Yeah.
but very Jewish. And so these concepts of soul, spirit, mind, heart. If you do a kind of a study of these concepts or terms in the Old Testament and the New Testament, they're not always consistently used. There's a bit of overlap, and so I guess the simplest way to express that is that you clearly have at least two traditions, probably more, that are grappling with the expression of these concepts of life and soul and spirit, consciousness. These are
Consciousness. You hate
yeah,
saying
yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's a dirty word for you.
Well, it's a pretty recent word, but of course all these English words are recent in one sense.
Right. Let
Uh,
me ask this real quick.
yeah.
Especially if it's Corinthians, one of the Corinthians is Dr. Robert, did you say first or second Corinthians, you think?
First Corinthians, I think.
First? Okay, I'll look it up when I have a chance. Is there a chance that since he's talking to the Corinthians, the Greeks, he's speaking Greek and they would relate to body, soul, and spirit?
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any
That's
question.
what you're saying?
Yeah, I don't. I mean, Paul even says explicitly, that he's trying to speak to the people in their current circumstances and in a way that they will understand. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The challenge, of course, is that, I mean, these are elusive concepts. That's a
Yes.
nice way to put it, right? So the heart is not elusive, of course. We pretty much know where that is, where it's located. But when it's used to express things like the kingdom of God is within you, or Jesus is in your heart. I don't. That doesn't call for a biopsy.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Nice.
So yeah, so they're elusive in that respect. I would just emphasize that there are these strong Hebrew concepts that do get taken up in the New Testament in and through the Greek language. And
okay.
these strong Hebrew concepts are life expressed as breath, and then probably correlated with the Greek concept of soul.
Yeah.
And there is this very strong notion of soul, or this very strong notion of not soul, but actually thinking and feeling, sentience.
But not consciousness, of course. Sorry. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, you're bad.
You're my friend. I shouldn't be mean to you. Everybody else is.
a notion of sentience that is usually usually expressed with the biological feature of the heart, rather than, so it's in the heart that one thinks.
Yes. Got
And
it.
and so that probably also gets correlated in some way with soul, uh, life and spirit. So they kind of run together in a way that that I think demonstrates that these are not, um, well, they're metaphysical concepts. They're not biological or physiological.
Right. Of course.
They're
Let me,
Go
sorry.
ahead. Yeah, no, that's it. Go ahead.
Okay, so let me follow up because I've always wondered this and I've just never taken the time to study it. So at this time, from Jesus' time to Paul's death, say,
Yeah.
What language is everybody speaking? I know that sounds weird, but I know Paul's speaking Greek because he learned Greek. But is Jesus speaking Aramaic and he learns Hebrew? How does that work? Is Paul speaking Aramaic?
Yeah,
Over.
well, it appears, certainly, by this time, remember that you already have a pretty extensive Jewish diaspora. So
Mm-hmm.
by the time that Jesus comes along, there are already quite a number of Jews throughout the world, the known
Right.
world, and clearly in some of the things that we're pretty, about 99% sure of, is uh, that Aramaic was the common speaking language at the time of Jesus, that he would have grown up speaking Aramaic in the household um, and around that region. Um, but Aramaic would not have been spoken outside of that region, right?
Right.
And what he would have learned Hebrew in the temple or with some teacher,
Yes.
and studying the manuscripts, the scrolls. He would have been taught how to read directly from the scrolls, apparently, the way
Yes.
that described in the New Testament. And apparently this was a practice throughout the diaspora, was that the rabbi would read directly from scrolls. So they would be reading Hebrew, regardless of where they lived. But if they were in Egypt, they would have been speaking Coptic, and in Greece, they would have been speaking Greek, and some version of Latin probably in Rome. And so it's it was very, very diverse, of course. Yeah,
So we
so
don't know for sure. I mean, Aramaic and Hebrew for sure, but when he's conversing with Romans, with Roman Gentiles, uh, uh, he is speaking what to them, or what? Maybe they know Aramaic.
you're talking about Jesus.
Jesus, in this sense,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting if if you're familiar with any sort of context in which there are several languages spoken,
Right.
what usually happens, I don't know if Robert wants to say anything about this, but what usually happens is that one language is dominant in one context. So it depends on which context. So maybe if you're in agriculture, I mean, one good example is northern Italy, where you find, French and German and Italian, and you find all these speakers in northern Italy. Uh, And one of the things that they develop is everybody kind of understands which language you speak in the context in which you happen to be having an exchange. Well, so at home, you usually speak the language of your family, your upbringing. In the marketplace, you might speak, whatever happens to be the dominant language for that particular village or community. And then in the courts or in the government buildings, there might be another language that is spoken. I know, for example, in where is it in uh um in Switzerland. Yeah, in Switzerland, some of the in the tradition of some of the universities there, they argued so much about whose language ought to be used that in many universities they speak English because they don't want one of the other languages to dominate. So they all agree to speak English in some cases because it's not a local language and they all learn it, So that's one way of doing it. So anyway, going back to your original question, it wouldn't have felt, I think, as awkward as it sounds to us. There would have been accepted ways of speaking that people would have known and practiced.
From growing up there, I got you.
Yeah, from growing up there, being familiar in that context. Certainly, Pilate could not have operated a government office there without being able to communicate in some way with the locals. So there would have been some, and the Romans were pretty good at this, actually, making linguistic concessions in order to promote social harmony and economics. Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, well, I think that's very good, very much the way I would have seen it too. I think you can really compare it to the Spanish-speaking people in our own population. Who, if they do business outside the community, they speak some English.
Yeah.
But Spanish at home, and it's sort of used to it, in a way that those of us that were raised on just one language, find hard to equal, but nonetheless.
Yeah.
If you're in a situation where you have to use several languages, then you do, especially those that are active in the business world and so on. And Switzerland, it's interesting. I remember from my days of collecting stamps that the Swiss always used Helvetia, which was the Latin word for what we now call Switzerland, on their stamp.
And their coins too.
Yeah, rather than trying to duplicate it in the 4 different languages that are official. So you get along with that. Yeah, that's right. They're just Robert's just saying, that they're just these accepted ways of speaking and communicating, and it wouldn't have been. I mean, I think part of what Robert is saying is that because most Americans grew up, especially in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, in communities that were homogeneously English speaking, our expectation is kind of that, well, that's the normal way that people are. But actually, for millions, or for I should say, for thousands of years, there have been communities and are communities with different languages and different cultures and practices and traditions that live in the same village, in the same community. So that's every bit as part of human culture as homogeneous language areas. There is some debate, I think, as to whether Jesus could speak Greek or not.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
was very near this Greco-Roman community, what they call Sisyphus or something like that,
Yeah.
which was actually constructed during Jesus' time, and there's speculation that Jesus' father may well have worked there, being carpenter, so it would have been a good local job.
Well, that was
But
Caesarea. Is that
No,
it?
not
Or
Caesarea.
Capernaum?
what?
Was it Capernaum?
No, no, it was not. Those are the towns down on the waterfront. I thought it was something like Sisyphus, but I may be wrong. But anyway, the point is that if Jesus worked there or even was in that community, he may well have picked up some Greek, but there's no real evidence of that. So it's kind of speculation.
Yeah, yeah. No, I know. That's what I think. That's what Steve was getting at. Is this question of whether Jesus spoke Greek or not? I mean, I think it probably would have been. I think it's sort of reasonable to expect, because of the place and time and community, he probably spoke a little bit of Greek.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of reasonable. He probably knew enough to get around and to get by, right?
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
I think Paul no doubt well, of course he wrote in Greek. So
Yes, he had a training.
I think he was also well educated in the Greek tradition as well as the Hebrew.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So we got off on this because of the notion of double spirit. Elisha.
I know. Sorry, guys.
No, that's okay.
And lady.
Well,
ladies.
No, it's okay, because I think it's relevant. It raises the question of what in the world does Elisha mean by asking for a double portion of his spirit.
And you wonder if there's some jealousy between, as one of you said, the family the prophetic family members. Patrick, I believe you said it. If they're jealous because Elisha presumably is not Elijah's son, somebody from outside the family is getting this whatever, or gets this special treatment or something. What do you think?
Yeah, no, there does seem to be some tensions there in the story between Elisha and these company of prophets. The translations don't try to clean that up. There does seem to be some tension of some sort. It's kind of difficult to put your finger on it, but it very well could be, who is the proper successor to Elijah.
Yeah.
But the text makes it pretty clear that there was never really any question it was going to be Elisha. I mean,
is there a chance he was one of the family members?
Yeah, I don't know about that. The text, I don't think, says that. So I don't think so.
And it would have, I suppose. It makes sense.
Well,
that it would have.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. He was. I was just looking at a couple of things here. No, I mean he went on. He did go. He was accepted by the company of prophets as the proper successor.
Oh, okay, right. All right.
But they might not have been all too happy with it.
Yes. Wow, what a great passage.
Yeah, it really is. There's so much there. And then of course the story of the parting of the waters and the chariot of fire, incredible images in the story.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I've taken us way over time. Sorry about that.
Well, that's okay. Thank you for your good questions. A good discussion, and look forward to being with you again tomorrow.
Yep.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.